I'll be the guy to ask the stupid question. I think there's this assumption that the people who own sports teams are just these rich guys who are paying out of pocket with cash to fund it. If the team loses 50 million, I'm so rich, doesn't matter. I lost 50 million. I didn't realize that debt played such a big role in running these teams.
And the dirty little secret was that the debt was interest only debt. It wasn't being
amortized. Oh, really?
Exactly. There was no amortization on the debt. And so if you built up a large debt load, at some point you're going to sell the team. You're going to pay, at some.
They kicked the can down the road.
Absolutely. That was the model.
The Lakers just got valued at $10 billion, and we've seen a flurry of team sales lately. Can you help us decode the art versus the science of how sports franchises are actually valued?
They're valued in 2 to 3 ways, and I say this somewhat tongue in cheek. In terms of metrics, what most bankers, PE funds that are now being more actively involved in sale transactions, they tend to look at one of 2 things. And typically the driving item is going to be a multiple of revenue.
Oh, good. Because that's the only one I know from the software world. I don't know what to do with profits.
That is, and it varies from league to league. These days, with the new media deals in place, the NFL and especially the NBA are probably tracking, 8 to 10x revenue into maybe the mid, the low to mid teens. Baseball, which has its own challenges, if people follow the sport, on the business side, they'll hear a lot of conversation around baseball with the upcoming 2026 CBA expiring, looking to put in place some type of what Rob would probably call, salary restraint, a cap. I like to call it a payroll cap and not a salary cap because you're not capping salaries. The NFL's got a cap. It's not they call it a salary cap, but it's really it's a payroll cap because you can still make $50 million in basketball and in baseball and in football. But that is, one of the things that's being discussed now. But until that happens, and until baseball likewise gets a better media deal, the revenue multiples in baseball are probably in the 5 to 8 times range. It's a great time to buy a baseball team if you've got a couple $1 billion sitting around under a mattress, because I think the belief is that at some point, if they're able to solve that issue, you'll have, like you've seen in basketball with the explosion of franchise values. When you solve that revenue piece, you not only do the revenues grow, but the multiples tend to increase as well when you've got that growth projection nailed down contractually.
Okay, so revenue's the first. I guess we'll call that the science.
That's the science. The art of it is a function of perception on the part of the buyer. And that is, I guess Forbes probably gets cited the most often in terms of franchise value. Sportico is also now publishing numbers that people tend to quote. And so there's this perception that's typically tied back to, the metric. They usually will use some form of revenue. Forbes will try to publish EBITDA numbers, having been on the inside, having seen all the numbers and compared them to what Forbes predicts for EBITDA. They're probably off by like 80%. They may, I think, stumble into, maybe a handful of them being right, but most of the time they're not right because no one publishes these numbers other than the Braves these days in baseball. But even across the other sports, it's, they're kind of guessing, what the cost structure looks like and what the nets look like. But there's this second category where if you're looking to buy a team, the first place you'll likely go or the first place your banker will likely go and say, this is what Forbes thinks it's worth. And it's usually tied to the first thing. So there's this, and this is classic, economics, what is the buyer willing to pay? The third piece, and I'll tell you a funny story about it, is, what does the owner expect to get? Because at the end of the day, that's the only number that matters. You can't do a hostile takeover of a sports team. And the funny story that I'll share, when I was with the Marlins, I worked initially for Wayne Heisinger, for the first 7 years. We won the World Series in '97. We lost $30-some million. And back to your earlier comment, Wayne, I remember, spoke to some business group in Texas the year after he sold the team. Well, let me go back a step. The year after we won the World Series, for the sports fans who remember back that far, we ended up basically dumping payroll.
Yeah, the year after, right?
Yeah, and because we lost so much money, and what Wayne said in explaining that, he says, I'm willing to lose, $30 million to win a championship once.
Yeah, I did it once.
So Wayne's selling the team, and John Henry is the prospective buyer. John now owns the Red Sox.
Oh, the Red Sox. Yeah, I didn't know that he was involved back then. Okay.
3 years. I worked for John for 2 of those 3 years when he bought the Marlins. He called it his starter club. And so John is negotiating with Wayne. The original price was $150 million, and John was ready to pay all cash to buy the Marlins at 150. Wayne was contemplating renovating, the stadium at that point, and in the course of doing so, he was going to assess part of the cost to the two tenants, the Dolphins that he also owned and the Marlins that he was selling. He decided through certain math that the proportionate share of his projected stadium cost increase was $8 million. So he just tacked on $8 million to the $150 million to John. And of course, John, blew a gasket. Oh, what do you mean? We had a deal. And Wayne said, basically, and this is the third point, if you want to buy the team, it's 158.
So it sounds like part of this is too just supply and demand. Let's say I'm making it up. There are 2,000 billionaires in the U.S. There are under 100 professional sports teams, I think.
Exactly. I saw an article just the other day. So apparently, the Tampa Bay Rays are for sale. There's an exclusive purchase period out there. The reported price is $1.7 billion for the Tampa Bay Rays. I think, Forbes may have them at 1.3 or 1.4, but Stu wants 1.7. So you're going to start there. But there's this group out that's been reported, know nothing about them, that says they're willing to pay more. So there's your valuation.
And what's also fascinating is if you look under the hood of what's included in that purchase. So the Celtics just sold for $6 billion, which was the record until the Lakers sale. But what a lot of people don't realize is the Celtics don't own the garden that they play in. Exactly. So that's a pretty big asset. The Bruins own it and they rent it from the Bruins. Yep. And then they also don't own the concessions for the food sales. So I guess there are different components that go into what's this worth.
On the flip side, though, they will be owning a piece of NESN, New England Sports Network.
Great call. Yes.
And so there's some value there, although it's, some might call it a shrinking asset with cord cutters and cord nevers out there. At some point, that's going to become a declining asset.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.